Thank you, Mr. President. Distinguished President of the Security Council, distinguished Special Representative, esteemed members of the Security Council. At the outset, I have no choice but to lodge a protest against the abuse of the video format of this session on the part of the representatives of Prištine in order to promote the symbols of the so-called statehood of Kosovo. Despite the fact that the representatives of Prištine were warned on several occasions, including by the President of the Security Council at the previous session, that such abuses of Security Council sessions are absolutely unacceptable and constitute a flagrant violation of the Security Council rules on participation of representatives of the provisional institutions of self-government in Prištine. Under Rule 39 of the UN Security Council Rules of Procedure, we are again faced with their reckless disregard for the rules of this distinguished body. Let me reiterate our call for the necessary steps to be taken to prevent such abuses. It is my great pleasure to address this august body at a meeting on the work of the mission of the United Nations in Kosovo and Metohija. At the outset, I would like to thank Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Guterres, and Special Representative of the Secretary General and Head of UNMIC, Mr. Tanin, for the report submitted and for their efforts made towards the implementation of the UNMIC mandate, and also to the members of the Security Council for the continuous attention that they have devoted to the issue of Kosovo and Metohija. The Republic of Serbia highly values the activities of the mission of the United Nations in Kosovo and Metohija and supports it in carrying out its work as efficiently as possible and undiminished in scope, aiming to build and preserve security in the province. Mr. President, in the previous period, we have faced political instability in Kosovo and Metohija. We recently had elections in the province, which unfortunately confirmed that political extremism among Albanians in Kosovo and Metohija is not decreasing, but on the contrary, is becoming stronger. We have witnessed Albanian leaders competing among themselves in efforts to find the best way to provoke an incident in Serb communities in order to score political points of the Albanian electorate. Under the pretext of amending the voter list, a large number of Serbs in Kosovo and Metohija were deprived of one of their fundamental political rights, the opportunity to elect their political representatives. Out of approximately 140,000 of citizens of Kosovo and Metohija who were removed from the voter list in the latest election process, 85% are Serbs. Despite numerous challenges and problems, the Serbian people in Kosovo and Metohija have shown by high turnout and a convincing victory of the Serb list, which won all 10 seats reserved for Serbian representatives, that nothing can stop them from resolutely defending their position. Political pressures on Serbs continued even after the election process was completed, by denying Serbs fair representation in provisional institutions, as the new so-called government in Prištine decided to assign only one ministry to the Serb community. Distinguished members of the Security Council. Unfortunately, it was not only during the election activities that we witnessed the unreasonable anti-Serb policy being pursued by the provisional institutions in Prištine. This goes to the length of breaking into the health center in Srpska, in the south of Kosovo and Metohija, by police inspectors and officers from Prištine in January this year, who conducted a search aiming to discover COVID-19 vaccines there, originating from central Serbia, which they did not find. In doing so, they demonstrated force and threatened to arrest the director of the health center, medical staff, and doctors. At a time when the whole world is fighting against the pandemic, with vaccines being the only way to end this challenge, While Serbia is showing support and solidarity by donating vaccines and medical equipment to all in need in the region, Prištine wants to destroy vaccines only because they originate from central Serbia. As the whole world expresses gratitude to medical doctors who have made great and heroic sacrifices in combating the virus, the provisional institutions in Priština are attacking Serbian doctors for doing their job. Although we believe that intrusions into healthcare institutions are inadmissible, our reaction was restrained this time as well. We did not want our decisions to cause escalation and politicization of activities that are solely aimed at protecting public health. We organized the vaccination of citizens from Kosovo and Metohija at 3 locations in central Serbia, and thus clearly demonstrated that people's lives are the top priority to us. Serbia continues to be ready to help all in need of assistance, and we call for reasons and responsibility, especially in such difficult times. Mr. President, attacks targeting Serbs and their property have been on the rise. In the last year alone, more than 80 attacks and incidents took place in our southern province, targeting Serbs, their property, and religious sites. According to the information provided by OSCE mission in Kosovo and Metohija, in the second half of last year, the number of incidents increased by more than 13% compared to 2019. Therefore, we cannot agree with the assessment that the security situation in Kosovo remains stable, with a few incidents reported affecting non-majority communities. Last weekend, for example, an entirely unprovoked physical attack by a group of Albanians on 2 Serb young men took place in the northern part of Kosovska Mitrovica. Serb returnees represent a particularly vulnerable category, who spent their every day in fear of being attacked. The fact that one family of returnees was the target of 7 attacks clearly indicates the persistence of those who do not want Serbs in Kosovo and Metohija. There is absolutely no trace of political will in Priština for 212,995 displaced Serbs who have been living outside Kosovo and Metohija for 22 years to return to their homes. I remind you that the southern Serbian province is still an area with the lowest return rate of displaced persons in the world. Since 1999, the rate of sustainable return of internally displaced persons in Kosovo and Metohija has been only 1.9%, which according to the UN data is officially the lowest percentage of return of expelled population after a conflict anywhere in the world. At the same time, Priština authorities are exerting the strongest of pressures on the specialist chambers in The Hague. The aim is to completely prevent the further processing of a number of cases against members of the terrorist KLA on charges of serious crimes committed during the conflict in Kosovo and Metohija against both Serbs and persons belonging to other nationalities. President of the Specialist Chambers, Madam Trandafilova, recently warned that should the pressures continue, this would have very dramatic consequences to the trials in progress. President Trandafilova underlined as highly problematic the phenomenon of witness intimidation, who are key for conducting proceedings successfully and rendering a proper verdict. Although the wait to rise indictments was far too long, we consider it commendable that efforts have finally been made to punish the perpetrators of numerous serious crimes which were committed during the armed conflicts a little over 2 decades ago, but also upon the arrival of the international forces to Kosovo and Metohija. For example, no one has been held accountable to this day for the killings and abductions of 17 journalists in Kosovo and Metohija, which is currently the largest number of unsolved cases of murder and kidnapped journalists in Europe. Furthermore, the perpetrators of any of the mass crimes committed against Serb civilians after 1999 have not been brought to justice. I will remind you of only a few of these cases. 14 Serb farmers were killed in the village of Starogradsko. 12 displaced Serbs were killed and 43 wounded in the attack on the Niš Express bus in Livadice near Podujeva. And in Goraždevac near Peć, unknown persons fired automatic weapons on children who were swimming in Bistrica River. 2 Serb children were killed then, and 4 were seriously injured. We expect the EULEX mission to continue to support the specialist chambers and the specialist prosecutor's office, as well as its additional engagement in the field of the rule of law. Special attention needs to be devoted to the witness protection and determining the fate of missing persons. International missions in Kosovo and Metohija, UNMIK, KFOR, EULEX, and OMIK are an integral part of the international civilian and security presence in our southern province under the administration of the United Nations and in line with United Nations Security Council Resolution 1244, and play a key role and make an outstanding contribution to the preservation of peace and protection of the population. We support and respect their engagement and efforts made in the framework of their mandates, with a common goal of creating conditions for a peaceful and safe coexistence of the inhabitants of Kosovo and Metohija. The Serb and other non-Albanian population in Kosovo and Metohija have the utmost confidence in the international presence and consider it a guarantor of security and a barrier against arbitrariness and of the provisional institutions in Prištine. This further demonstrates the need that international missions remain engaged in an undiminished scope in order to consistently implement the Resolution 1244. I would like to further emphasize the importance of KFOR international forces and point out that any unilateral attempt to assign to someone else or that someone else assumes a part of KFOR's mandate and responsibilities constitutes a violation of the Resolution 1244, while also being a potential source of instability and tensions. I will remind you that Prištine, contrary to international law and completely ignoring the interests and positions of the Serb community in the province, would not abandon its plans to install a new security actor in the territory of Kosovo and Metohija. We consider the unilateral decisions on the formation of the Ministry of Defense and launching the process of transforming the so-called Kosovo security forces into so-called Kosovo army to be unacceptable. I would like to reiterate that such unilateral moves on the part of Prištine constitute a gross violation of the Resolution 1244 and the military technical agreement, according to which only the international security forces, that is KFOR, have the mandate for all military aspects of security in the territory of Kosovo and Metohija. In this context, an additional reason for concern is the announcement of the construction of the largest base of the Kosovo security forces in the southern part of Kosovska Mitrovica, which Serbs in the north of Kosovo and Metohija perceive as the most open provocation and a threat to their physical safety. distinguished members of the Security Council. It is particularly worrying for the Serbian people in Kosovo and Metohija that in the previous period, and especially in March this year, there were frequent physical attacks on the property of the Serbian Orthodox Church. In just 2 weeks, as many as 7 Orthodox landmarks in the province were targeted by vandals, at a time when we all remember the March 2004 pogrom against Serbs and Serbian holy sites in Kosovo and Metohija. The condition of the Serbian cultural and spiritual heritage in Kosovo and Metohija is humiliating, including the 4 monuments that are inscribed on the UNESCO list of World Heritage in danger. Numerous administrative and technical barriers are imposed on priestly and monastic communities, which makes it more difficult or even impossible for them to survive on church property. A striking example of the disrespectful attitude towards Serbian cultural and religious monuments in the province, whose exceptional universal value UNESCO confirmed by inscribing them to the World Heritage List, is the case of Monastery Visoki Dečani. Distinguished members of the Security Council, the reason for the nervous behavior of Priština is all too obvious, as the project of the so-called independence today fails to be recognized by more than a half of United Nations member states, including 5 members of the EU. However, it is high time for Albanian leaders in Pristina to show responsibility in fulfilling their commitments, but also a sincere commitment to reaching a compromise solution and building mutual trust. I will remind you that the current Prime Minister of the Provisional Institutions of Self-Government in Pristina has repeatedly threatened to unite the self-proclaimed Kosovo and Albania in the past. A member of his party publicly said last weekend that the self-proclaimed Kosovo and Albania would be united, I quote, with rifle and gunpowder or referendum boxes. I need to explain why such dangerous ideas constitute a direct threat to peace and stability. They violate Resolution 1244, while continuously destabilizing not only our southern province, but the entire region as well, and in no way contribute to the dialogue process, but instead hamper it again. We have demonstrated time and time again our commitment to dialogue as the only way towards a peaceful political solution to the problem in Kosovo and Metohija. Even today, after many years of negotiations, but also failure to fulfill what was agreed and constant unilateral moves and provocations on the part of the provisional institutions in Pristina, we are still ready to sit down at the table and talk. We are ready for dialogue, but not to be blackmailed and threatened, and especially not for ultimatums recently presented by newly elected Prime Minister of so-called Kosovo. I will remind you of his statement that the dialogue will be low on the list of priorities of the Pristina authorities. It is bewildering how Pristina refers to the ultimatums, completely undermining any chance of dialogue, as the European Union also pointed out as principles, and how it persistently insists that Belgrade should recognize the unilaterally declared independence of so-called Kosovo, upon which they believe all else would be resolved. What is the purpose of the dialogue then, if Belgrade is only expected to recognize the so-called Kosovo? Does the dialogue imply that one side should give up everything only for the other to win it all? And does the dialogue, in Pristina's opinion, imply that what was agreed should not be fulfilled? I will remind you that Pristina still refuses to follow up on its obligations arising from the agreements reached so far and does not agree to discuss their implementation within the dialogue. And the situation is quite simple. In April 2013, the first agreement was signed in Brussels, which envisaged 4 obligations, 1 for Pristina and 3 for Belgrade. Belgrade has fulfilled all obligations, while the only obligation that the provisional institutions in Pristina had to form the community of Serb municipalities has remained unfulfilled for 2,917 days now. In fact, 19 April marks 8 full years since the agreement was reached in Brussels. Regardless of the discouraging messages heard from Pristina and the fact that the dialogue has been in progress for many years, Serbia is determined and will not give up on identifying a compromise solution, which will be sustainable for future generations as well. Lasting peace and stability can only be achieved if none of the participants in the dialogue pursues maximalist demands and insists on the complete humiliation of the other. The Serbian and Albanian peoples are the two most numerous peoples in the Western Balkans. They need to find a way to reach reconciliation and a basis for cooperation, both in terms of the economy and in achieving shared prospects for membership to the EU. Belgrade has made sincere steps in that direction by being one of the initiators of the idea of relaxing the flow of people, goods, capital, and services, popularly referred as mini Schengen. As far as Serbia is concerned, we are convinced that the only way to build lasting peace and stability in the region is by working to build trust and insisting on positive political agendas. The inhabitants of Kosovo and Metohija, of any nationality, whether they are Serbs or Albanians, do not deserve anything less. Thank you for your attention.